13 years have passed by between Genesis chapter 16 and 17. Abram is still waiting for the son of promise to be born and still really believing that Ishmael would be an acceptable heir. Yet God in his wisdom still has a better plan. That said, there's several important features of this text. Certainly the renaming of Abram and Sarai so as to correspond with their new identities, the blessing of Ishmael, and the revelation that Sarah, in spite of her advanced age, would give birth to a son. All those things are important, but this morning I want to briefly focus on the covenant of circumcision that God establishes with Abram and his descendants. Now look, physically, circumcision is a relatively straightforward endeavor, and it was not something that was unheard of at the time. What is new here is the symbolism, the spiritual significance that God attaches to it, and the reality that it becomes a sort of distinctive cultural feature of the Hebrew people. And so the question becomes why? Why would God ordain this rather bloody act as a way of being set apart? Well, two reasons. First, the rather delicate and personal nature of the surgery points to the personal nature of our identity. It was common at that time to seal an oath by alluding to that part of the body. So I think it makes sense that God would likewise include that in order to demonstrate the seriousness of the covenant. Circumcision thus marked Abram and his descendants as different, as being set apart ultimately to God, as ones who were linked to God by an oath. Secondly, the operation demands an acknowledgement of the personal and intimate nature of sin that all of us harbor. In this sense, the male organ comes to represent the innate depravity that all of us struggle with. And so the cutting away of the foreskin thus symbolically shows that all of us, again, have a need to remove sin from our lives and to be cleansed. The spiritual reality is made clear by the prophet Jeremiah, who would later write, "Circumcise yourselves to the Lord. Remove the foreskin of your hearts, O men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my wrath go forth like fire and burn with none to quench it because of the evil of your deeds." It's found in Jeremiah chapter 4 and verse 4. Circumcision didn't save anyone. Rather, as we've seen with Abram, it was a sign of his covenantal relationship with God, a relationship that was built on faith and the righteousness that is credited because of faith. For us today, who live under the new covenant, physical circumcision has no spiritual benefit. But the spiritual reality that undergirds the physical act is still very much real. It's real, but in Jesus we have a better option. We don't just cut away part of our lives or our bodies or our heart and attempt to change our behavior or remove the bad or wicked parts. Instead, through Jesus, we may be reborn. We may receive what the prophet Ezekiel calls a new heart and a new spirit. A new heart of flesh that is turned toward God, desires to know and to follow him. A new heart that allows us to truly live as God's people, as people of faith. So as you read Genesis chapter 17, know that the events of the chapter had a real meaning for Abram and Sarah. But know also that these events and the themes are hugely important for us to grapple with as well. For all of the promises of this chapter, find their fulfillment in Jesus. And it is in Jesus that we too find our identity, salvation, and eternal promise.